According to ancient legend, Atlantis was an advanced and powerful island nation, rich, ambitious, and proud. Then, in a single catastrophic day, it vanished beneath the sea. Some versions blame earthquakes. Some suggest a tsunami. Others frame the disaster as divine punishment. A civilization destroyed because it became too arrogant, too powerful, and too sure of itself. Atlantis may have been real, myth, or some blurry combination of history and warning. But either way, the story feels uncomfortably current. Because New Orleans is not going to vanish tomorrow. It probably won't disappear in one decisive storm either. But a new paper in Nature Sustainability argues that southern Louisiana has reached a point of no return, and that for New Orleans, the hard conversation may need to shift from flood protection to relocation. The Guardian's summary of the study says the city could be submerged in wetlands and surrounded by the Gulf of Mexico before the end of this century. So the question is not whether New Orleans becomes Atlantis overnight. Maybe the question is whether America is ready to watch one of its most iconic cities become an island, and still call that adaptation. New Orleans is especially vulnerable because it is not facing just one climate threat. It is facing several at once. The city sits low. Parts of the region are sinking. The sea is rising, and the wetlands that once helped buffer storms are disappearing. Louisiana has already lost roughly 1,900 square miles of coast since 1932. And the city of New Orleans notes that the state accounts for about 80% of the nation's coastal wetland loss. Those wetlands are not just scenery. They are part of the city's natural storm protection system. As they vanish, hurricanes and storm surge have a clearer path toward the communities behind them. And this is where New Orleans becomes different from a lot of other flood-prone American cities. A city like Houston can keep sprawling north and west, even if that creates its own problems. Miami has its own nightmare with sea level rise and porous limestone. But New Orleans is a low-lying city surrounded by a landscape that is physically coming apart. The new Nature Sustainability paper argues that southern Louisiana may be one of the most physically vulnerable coastal zones in the world. The Guardian's summary says researchers believe relocation planning needs to start now instead of waiting for the crisis to become unmanageable. The scariest part is that New Orleans has already spent billions trying to defend itself. The levees, flood walls, pumps, and post-Katrina upgrades matter. They save lives, they buy time, but they do not stop the land from sinking, the Gulf from rising, or the coast from dissolving around the city. Louisiana even canceled the $3 billion Mid-Barataria sediment diversion project in 2025, a major restoration effort that was supposed to rebuild more than 20 square miles of land over 50 years. So the question is not whether engineers can buy New Orleans more time. They can. The question is how much time? And what happens when even expensive protection starts to look less like rescue and more like delay? Or worse, what happens when potentially workable solutions simply do not happen because budgets are stretched, politics shift, or other priorities win? The city and state have done a lot. That is not the question. The dilemma is whether doing more is enough when the city is surrounded by water from almost every direction. From the Gulf, from the sky, from the river, from sinking land, and even from below. That is why the paper suggests it may be time to prioritize relocation more seriously, not just mitigation. And that does not mean abandoning people. At least it should not. It means asking whether we can create a smoother, more humane transition for hundreds of thousands of people before disaster forces the issue household by household. Louisiana has already suffered population loss, and the paper argues that displacement could accelerate rapidly, not in one clean, organized evacuation, but in a disorganized and often cruel way. We tend to picture climate retreat as a plan. Maps, meetings, relocation funds, maybe even new neighborhoods built on safer ground. But history suggests retreat is often much uglier than that. During the Dust Bowl, families were not politely invited to migrate. They were pushed out by drought, debt, failed farms, and a collapsing economy. Southern Louisiana could face its own version of that migration, not with dust storms and dead crops, but with flooded streets, vanishing land, canceled insurance, lost jobs, and homes no one can afford to rebuild. And this is where the Atlantis comparison becomes more than a dramatic title. New Orleans is not Atlantis because it was too sinful, too proud, or too powerful. That kind of moralizing is too easy and too cruel. Real people live there. Real families, neighborhoods, graves, music, food, memory, and culture are tied to that place. But there is a kind of modern hubris in this story. It is the belief that if we build the levees high enough, pump hard enough, dredge enough, insure enough, and rebuild enough, then the water will eventually accept our terms. It is the belief that a city can keep negotiating with the Gulf forever, even as the land sinks, the sea rises, and the wetlands vanish. I do not take any pleasure in talking about this. New Orleans is not just a dot on a climate risk map. It is the Big Easy, a city with music, food, history, neighborhoods, memory, and a soul people recognize all over the world. And New Orleans is not alone. Galveston, Miami, and hundreds of smaller coastal communities are facing their own versions of this question. Some may be defended for a long time. Some may adapt. Some may shrink. Some may eventually have to move. But pretending we do not see the problem coming will not make it kinder. Like the legendary people of Atlantis, we could become victims of our own short-sightedness. Not because the gods are angry, but because physics does not negotiate. Denial makes retreat more chaotic, more expensive, and more cruel. So even if the conversation is painful, we need to have it now, while there is still time to plan, to preserve what can be preserved, and to treat the people affected with as much dignity and compassion as possible. Because the real tragedy would not be admitting that some places are in danger. The real tragedy would be waiting until families are forced out one disaster at a time, with no plan, no help, and no one willing to say we should have seen this coming. I'm sure some of you will have plenty to say, and the comments are open. I hope you continue this conversation by subscribing to this channel and liking the video. Until I see you again, take care.